At a certain point in time, you have to make a decision. Am I going to go for a record single, or does this feel like shit and I'm going to branch off and go for a record triple, or is this just not happening today and I need to branch off and just stop and just do the accessory work? All these variables have to happen on the spot. That's auto-regulation. To me, that's when a good lifter is going to be able to become a great lifter and be able to avoid getting hurt, compared to a program to where they're just going to keep.
Get the fuck up. Simon says, get the fuck up. Throw your hands in the sky.
All right, this question is from, I apologize for some of these Instagram names. Check Lechner 10, and it's auto-regulation versus percentage-based programming for off-season versus peaking. I know you have strong feelings with deloading, so I'd love to hear what you think about auto-regulation. Thanks for your knowledge. Auto-regulation and deloading is kind of the same thing to me. Auto-regulation, I think, is the overriding goal of what any lifter wants to try to master if they want to excel within the sport domain that they're in, if it's bodybuilding, powerlifting, strongman, even Olympic weightlifting for that matter. And the article that we put up on Alexia, one of the things that he said in there, two of the big things that really stuck out, or biggest takeaways from the article, is you really don't learn what the sport means to you until you have a career-ending injury. And the second one was when he finally learned how to train himself is when he became a world champion. So to be able to get to that point takes a great deal of knowledge. You need to be able to acquire knowledge to be able to understand programming and to understand how the body works and how the body recovers. My bias with programming is concurrent conjugate periodization. I'm heavily biased towards that. I don't think anybody has any doubt that I'm biased towards that. And I think that's the best programming that you can use for any sport. Just how modifications obviously need to be changed based upon the needs of the sport and the athlete, and there has to be individual aspects that are accounted for, sport aspects and so forth. So I'm not saying this one written program is going to work for everything across the board. It's a methodology of training the same way as linear periodization or block periodization. That's just where my bias is, because that's where I have the most expertise. I know how to manipulate all the variables much better, like a puppet master, so to say. So from that standpoint, if we're going to use concurrent training, and I'll use that because it's easier for me to explain what I'm trying to say here. There's different segments in the program that are all happening at the same time. Thus the word concurrent, coupling, conjugate, putting together. They're all being cycled into the training at the same time. Where in a block scheme or even a linear periodization scheme, you're going to have strength phases, peak phases, strength phases, power phases, peak phases, transitional phases, accumulation phases. I mean, there's different phases. When you're dealing with concurrent, you're trying to do all the shit at the same time. So within that realm, you're going to have different things that cycle on different wheels, so to say, like an engine. Different size flywheels are going to turn, the cables all at different rates. So a max effort exercise that may shift and change every week is going to be, a very, very small flywheel. It's changing all the time. So it's cycling every week. When you're dealing with the dynamic effort method and you're going through different dynamic effort waves, those can cycle anywhere between 3 and 5 weeks. So you're getting, 5 max effort cycles within one dynamic cycle. Then when you're dealing with the supplemental work, which are the main lifts that are going to help drive the bigger lifts, the max effort max effort lifts and the competitive lifts, they might cycle for a week, 5 5 training sessions, 6 training sessions, 4 training sessions. It's all kind of based upon how you feel, but it's a different flywheel circulating at a different time. And then when you get down into accessory work, which is the small little shit like hammer curls and shoulder raises and all that, that stuff may never change. It may be every 8 weeks you might change it up a little bit, or you may change it. It's kind of on feel there as well, but it's definitely a bigger flywheel. They're all cycling at different rates. So they're all kind of, they all have their own recovery built in. As I said in one of the earlier table talks, with the max effort work, if you start to feel like you're being beat down from that, you're gonna throw in high rep dumbbell presses or maybe good mornings, or you're just gonna do a concentric only thing. That takes care of helping to add in the recovery of that. With the supplemental exercises, cycling out of exercises that begin to create any type of tenderness or odd feeling, I don't want to say pain because it shouldn't get to the point of pain, you're going to cycle out of it before that. The dynamic work's going to cycle every 3 weeks, every 5 weeks, and the workload and the volume of that's going to cycle throughout that. So all the recovery is inherently built into the general scheme of the concurrent program, and that's before you begin to throw in extra workouts for recovery if needed, and extra workouts for, which I would call feeder workouts, to be done before a day that's going to be stressful. So if it's a max effort exercise that you know beats the shit out of you every time you do it, for me it was a good morning squat. So if I knew that was going to be cycled in, which we rarely did know, but if I knew it was going to be cycled in, I would go on the day beforehand and do some extra work for my lower back, extra work for my hamstrings. Very, very light, nothing that's going to accumulate, any type of scar tissue, or nothing I really have to recover from, but just to kind of loosen things up. So when I come in the next day, I'm going to feel fresh. I'm going to feel better than if I hadn't done it at all. Then if I feel beat up after that max effort day, that next day I'm going to go in and do movement-based activity to get the blood circulating to help process the nutrients to help me recover. Could be sled dragging, it could be walking on a treadmill, it could be a short circuit of reverse hypers, hanging leg raises, glute ham raises, all really, really light, nothing that's going to create anything that I'm going to have to recover from. So those are inherently built in to be able to help with the recovery as well. So when you're dealing with auto-regulation, the auto-regulation is knowing when you should change those supplemental exercises, when you should change the accessory exercises, when you need to have a feeder workout, when you should have the recovery workout. And if you're working up on max effort, say you pick a max effort exercise and you're working up on that and it doesn't feel right, at a certain point in time you have to make a decision. Am I going to go for a record single, or does this feel like shit and I'm going to branch off and go for a record triple, or is this just not happening today and I need to branch off and just stop and just do the accessory work? All these variables have to happen on the spot. That's auto-regulation. To me, that's when a good lifter is going to be able to become a great lifter and be able to avoid getting hurt, compared to a program to where they're just going to keep busting through shit because they know in a few weeks it's going to be a down week. Well, to me, that doesn't make any sense, because if you're warming up and you feel like shit, what are you going to just keep pounding it until you have the down week? And what if the down week you feel good? So there's too many factors that go into the recovery process when it comes to training. And I have a really hard time believing that a decrease in percentages with submaximal weight. So if somebody's training at 60, 65, 70%, then after the 70% on week 4, they're going to drop down to 60%. And that's with the squat, bench, or the deadlift, or whatever it's going to be. I have a hard time believing that this 15% drop in percentage is going to enhance the recovery ability, because you're talking about a 15% drop on a percentage which is basically fictitious to begin with, because it's either based upon something you did 10 weeks ago that you may not be able to do now. If you got stronger, it may vary the percentage. You may be sick, it could vary the percentage. So the percentage isn't really concrete to begin with. So if you're gonna have a 10% drop in one exercise out of a whole training week, I have a really hard time believing that's gonna be enough to really help you recover and to be able to bounce back and to keep from burning out. I don't believe that. That's not, and some of it is because my bias towards concurrent training, that should already be built into, the dynamic training cycle, because it will wave, and it's kind of built into the max effort work to where it's going to phase in there. But it's going to phase in, when you need it, which becomes a little complex for beginners and intermediates because they don't know when. And that's when you need to rely on somebody who understands and knows how to program intelligently, because yes, they are going to have to drop in certain areas to where they're going to either tell you, increase your sleep or start using contrast methods, or there's so many things that impact recovery that far exceed one exercise and a 10% drop on that. There's sleep, there's nutritional standpoints, there's stress, there's work stress, there's environmental stress, there's medications, there's pollution. I mean, we can name 100 different things that all are going to impact somebody's ability to recover. Training one exercise is just one of those things. But from an intelligent training standpoint, it is one of those things that can be put in there that will help, but it has to be somewhat flexible to be able to move based upon how the person feels at the given point in time. If the person's a beginner, they really have no choice but to kind of go through, feel it out, and see how it works for them. Where the message that I'm keep putting out and been putting out for close to 20 years now is to learn how to do this shit yourself. So not somebody else doesn't have to be able to tell you that, because especially now when so many training is happening online, an online coach doesn't see what you look like when you walk through the door. They don't see if you're pissed off, if you're stressed out, if your shoulders are slouched. They don't see what your warm-ups look like. They don't see if your knees are caving in on the warm-ups or your hip shifting, or if it takes you extra long to warm up. They don't see if your eyes are bloodshot, if you haven't slept. There's so many variables that they don't see, that they can only work from a very, very select amount of data that they're putting together. So that's where, the intelligent programming is going to have some type of deload put in there, because they don't have all the other data to be able to work from, because they don't see it. The message I'm putting out there to the lifters is, you have that data, you know it because you can see in the mirror and you know what you feel like, and then if you have a coach, work with your coach on how to better utilize that so you can learn how to auto-regulate your own training, because maybe you need more warm-up sets or less warm-up sets. Maybe you need to cut the workout short. Maybe you need to push harder. There's a lot. Beginners typically, from what I see, need to train harder. Advanced lifters need to train less. And that's pretty much 90% across the board what I've seen with everybody I know. That's a general rule that's almost always the case. So yes, auto-regulation is important. The question is tied into, how does it compare to percent-based training? Percent-based training is still always going to be part of every program, because you have to have something to be able to give some type of guideline or range as to what weight you're going to be lifting for a given day, and it provides something to be able to have a wave, or if it's a block training, actually that's a wave too, or if it's linear, a full cycle. There has to be something to provide some base of comparison to be able to move forward or cycle and wave in some way whatsoever. So the problem isn't so much about the deloading. The problem is about what is being deloaded and what is not being deloaded, and how the deloading is actually being implemented, and the lack of coaching the lifters to be able to deload themselves based upon how they feel, because that has to be part of the coaching process. It has to be, because you'll end up pushing on days you shouldn't push, and you're going to end up pushing too hard on days you should back off. And there's no way anybody who is sending you programs on a weekly basis, or an online consultant, or whatever you're working with, is going to know those things. They're not going to know. It's up to you, the client, to be able to express that to the coach you're working with so they can help you to learn how to do these things. And somebody who is good at what they do and is good at it as a coach and with the online training will know exactly what to tell you. They will know exactly, especially if they're following your training. And if you walk in the gym and you're trying to warm up and you feel like shit popping out a text message, they will know exactly what you're supposed to do. What I'm trying to do is to tell you to become more active in that process so you can learn these things for yourself in the long term. You hear Louis speak about me trying to get him hurt. Well, that's true. I was trying to put that motherfucker in the hospital. He was trying to put me in the hospital.
Oh, I got one, dude. I know what the most disgusting is. Wait, I don't know if we can talk about it.